driven, coal-eyed U.S. prosecutor who radiated a moral fervor. He was a very intense character.
If you violate the laws, whether insider trading or tax evasion or fraud or bribery, it's so-called white-collar crime, the overwhelming general rule is that you go to prison.
Kind of a crusader knight, which was clearly also going to how he saw himself.
As the chief federal prosecutor in his area, Giuliani comes across like the Hollywood stereotype of the tough, dedicated crime buster.
All of these areas of crime are dangerous and destructive of our society.
This epic sense of himself, that's what made him such a relentless prosecutor. It's also what made him so cruel. He knew that he was right. He felt that he was the scourge of God.
This fall in federal court, Giuliani will personally prosecute perhaps the biggest case of his entire career, the so-called Mafia Commission case.
The alleged heads of the New York five crime families have been arrested in a crackdown. And U.S. Attorney Rudolph Giuliani says that the mafia could be destroyed if the pressure is kept on it.
His targets include names like Paul Castellano,
Anthony Fat Tony Salerno, the 76-year-old boss of the Genovese Mafia family, now serving a 100-year sentence.
One of the things that these indictments demonstrate is that the upper echelon of the mob is no longer invincible.
He was a perfect match for New York City. He was a perfect match for a tabloid culture. He was a perfect match for a crime reporting culture. And he was brash, and he was a self-promoter.
Great day for law enforcement, but this is a bad day, probably the worst, for the mafia. The indictment alleges numerous specific instances of bribery, extortion, fraud, tax fraud, obstruction of justice, perjury.
Clearly, he impacted the mob in New York more than anyone else had, and was able to take out mob bosses who had been sitting there in place for a generation.
When people say there is no mafia and these organizations don't exist, I mean, I know from my history that there is such a thing, and I know what it does and what it can do.
There have been 80 death threats against Mayor Giuliani so far this year.
It is not unusual to have the people that you are investigating and prosecuting threatening to kill you. It's an emotional reaction from people at the time that they're being pursued.
Rudy Giuliani was always a calculating, intentional demagogue. The way you do politics is find an enemy, beat up on them, play on people's fears and prejudices. He needs an enemy.
He was going to be the sheriff of Wall Street. He was going to clean it up. There was a guy, he walked out of the office. He always managed to let the press know. He would very much exploit press coverage of walking an accused.
Wall Street also found itself a Giuliani target in an insider trading scandal.
So if you think about the 1980s, when suddenly these guys like Michael Boski and Michael Milken were becoming insanely wealthy, they were new villains.
Certain months signed always the best, but at the end of the year, it turns out that that's really what counts.
They were the greed is good people, and Rudy went after them too.
3 persons were arrested and charged with illegal profits of millions and millions of dollars.
Among those arrested, 9 stockbrokers, all in their 20s and 30s, 8 of them from one firm.
It was fantastic, and for New Yorkers, it was a spectacle. And Rudy, in his ruthless way, would make these guys do a perp walk. That is, instead of doing what was considered the correct thing when you have dignified gentlemen in 3-piece suits, which is you ask them to turn themselves in at the precinct house. No, Rudy would send in the FBI. He would have alerted TV news, and these guys worked at big investment banks, would be marched out in front of the TV cameras to the edification of all New Yorkers and, of course, the utter humiliation of themselves, their family, and loved ones.
The problem with that thinking is it's not the perpetrator. It is somebody accused of the crime. There's a presumption of innocence.
When I think of Rudy Giuliani and I think of theater, I think of those perp walks.
As to the defendant, Stanley Friedman, the indictment charges his participation in 3 bribery schemes
as part of the racketeering enterprise.
This verdict is a very significant victory for the honest and decent citizens of New York City who have had to labor under the yoke of people like Stanley Friedman for too darn long.
And, you know, there's something sort of horrifying about that, at least from a professional ethics perspective, that we really don't think of ourselves as center stage.
Enormous vaulting ambition. And that set off some alarms somewhere in the back of your head. Like, it's a very bright guy. This is a very ambitious guy. And if you get in his way, he'll crush you.
The charges are quite extensive within the indictment and what's on the public record. But if there are some additional restraints on what we say, you should understand that.
Quite a few of Rudy's most spectacular wins were overturned on appeal. And that sometimes gets left out of the record, because Rudy would always brag, you know, I won every case, every big case, etc. Well, no, a lot of them got overturned. And the justice system pushed back. And so that's the danger of that kind of absolute self-certainty.
The indictment should speak for itself. There's no need for Mr. Giuliani or any other prosecutor to embellish.
He wasn't getting his picture in the New York Post as often as he could without the intent of moving beyond the U.S. Attorney's Office.
But Giuliani says he has no game plan, no specific job in mind after this one.
Rudy Giuliani, he was never thought of as a softie, right? He was the guy who took down the mob. But there was a change.
Thank you, Rudy Giuliani.
Thank you very much.
And he became more of an avenging figure than he had been before.
Rudolph Giuliani, thank you for being with us.
Fear is in effect a political tool, and fear is real.
Would you like to be mayor of New York City?
It would obviously be a great honor to be considered for mayor of New York City, but so would a lot of other things.